I had been working for the U.S. Forest Service for exactly 11 days when my supervisor told me to pack a bag for Trail 210. She said it the way you'd say anything routine: hand me that stapler, check the truck's oil. But two of the other seasonal employees in the Bankhead Ranger District office looked up from their desks when she said it. One of them, a guy named Corey, who'd been there 3 summers already, caught my eye and held it for about a second longer than was comfortable. Then he went back to his paperwork. The Bankhead Ranger District covers the William B. Bankhead National Forest in northwest Alabama. If you've been there, you probably know the Sipsey Wilderness, the canyon country, the sandstone bluffs, the waterfalls that pour off the Cumberland Plateau into hemlock-shaded gorges that feel like they belong in the southern Appalachians. Not the rolling farmland an hour south of the Tennessee line. If you haven't been, the simplest way I can describe it is this. It's about 25,000 acres where the geology forgot what state it was in. This is the kind of place I'm going to be describing. And if you appreciate careful, honest accounts of things that happen in the backcountry, things that don't always have neat explanations, then Ashwarden Horror is a channel worth subscribing to. I've listened to a lot of these stories myself, and they're the reason I decided to finally tell mine. My name is Darren Gaines. In the spring of 2023, I was 24 years old, fresh out of a forestry program at Auburn, and this was my first seasonal position with the Forest Service. The Bankhead District Office operates out of a small building on Highway 33 in Double Springs, Alabama. The staff was small and had gotten smaller. Budget cuts had reduced the seasonal crew to 4 of us that year, down from 6 the previous summer. Our duties covered trail maintenance, campsite monitoring, visitor contacts, and whatever else needed doing across 181,000 acres of national forest. My supervisor was a woman named Angie Pruitt. She'd been the lead recreation technician on the district for 9 years and had the kind of authority that comes from outlasting every reorganization. She didn't explain assignments. She issued them. Trail 210 needs a condition assessment, she said. Brushing, drainage check, tread evaluation. Full walkthrough, Randolph Trailhead to the south terminus at the 208 junction. Take the standard form. You'll want 2 days. I didn't question it. I'd been doing condition assessments on other trails already. 200, 203, the first mile of 209. Trail 210 was just another number. It ran along the eastern edge of the Sipsey Wilderness, roughly 4.5 miles, connecting the Brazil Creek Trailhead area on the north end to the Trail 208 corridor on the south. On the district map, it looked like a parenthesis, a long, slightly curved line, with no loops, no spur trails, no named features. I packed my field kit that afternoon. Condition report forms, flagging tape, hand tools, a Garmin GPS unit, first aid kit, water filter, and enough food for 2 days. Corey walked past my truck while I was loading it. "You know about 210?" he said. "I know it needs brushing." He leaned against the tailgate. "Every new seasonal gets sent to 210. First summer, first few weeks. Angie's been doing it for years. Marcus got sent last year. I got sent my first summer. Girl named Devereaux got sent the summer before me." Sent to do what? Condition assessment. Full walkthrough. He smiled, but it wasn't a joke smile. It was the kind of smile you use when you're testing whether someone is ready to hear something. "It's a real assignment. Trail really does need the work. It's one of the least maintained trails in the system. Barely gets hiked. Overgrown in sections. Cambered bad on the side hill portions. You'll earn your per diem. But everybody comes back a little different, and nobody really talks about why." I waited for him to say more. He didn't. He slapped the tailgate twice, like you'd pat a dog and walked back inside. I want to be clear about something. I did not drive out to the Sipsey wilderness the next morning expecting anything unusual. I was a first-season employee doing my job. Whatever Corey was hinting at, I filed it under the same category as every other piece of informal workplace lore, the kind of thing people say to mess with the new guy. Every outfit has it. Don't use the third stall in the bathroom. Don't park under the oak tree. Don't go into the supply closet after dark. It's theater. You ignore it, you do your work, and eventually you're the one telling the next new hire the same stories. I left Double Springs at 6:30 in the morning on a Thursday in late May. The drive to the Brazil Creek trailhead took about 40 minutes south on 33. Then a series of progressively narrower forest roads that turned from pavement to gravel to packed dirt. The morning was warm and overcast. Mid-70s, with the low-hanging humidity that settles into the Alabama plateau country in late spring and doesn't lift until October. The Brazil Creek trailhead is not much to look at. A small gravel pullout, a brown Forest Service trail marker, and a metal gate. No kiosk, no map board, no restroom. The kind of trailhead that tells you right away the trail beyond it doesn't get many visitors. My truck was the only vehicle in the pullout. I logged my start time on the condition report form, marked the GPS waypoint, and started walking. Trail 210 begins at the north end with a gentle descent through mixed hardwood oak, hickory, maple, with scattered understory of dogwood and redbud. For the first half mile, it follows an old logging grade, wide and flat, and the walking was easy. I could see immediately why it needed maintenance. Vegetation was encroaching from both sides, narrowing the corridor to about 18 inches in places. Drainage structures, the small earthen berms and water bars that keep runoff from eroding the tread, were silted in or collapsed. I flagged problem areas as I went, noting locations on the GPS and scribbling descriptions on the form. Normal work. At roughly the 1 mile mark, the old logging grade ends and the trail narrows to a proper footpath. This is where the character of the terrain changes. The ridgeline drops away to the west, and the trail begins contouring along a steep side hill above a drainage. I couldn't see but could hear water running somewhere below the canopy of mountain laurel and rhododendron that choked the slope. The cambering that Corey had mentioned was real. In several places, the tread had slumped downhill, leaving a tilted surface barely wide enough for one boot. I had to use my hands on the uphill bank to stay balanced. I'd been on the trail for about 2 hours when I noticed the first thing I couldn't explain. It was a blaze mark. A standard Forest Service trail blaze, a 6-inch vertical rectangle of white paint on a tree at roughly eye level, except it was on the wrong side of the tree. It faced away from the trail, into the woods, toward the downhill slope, as if it had been placed to mark a route leading off the trail and down into the drainage. I walked around the tree. The trail-facing side had no blaze. I checked the next several trees in both directions. The regular blazes were there, properly oriented, faded but visible, marking the 210 corridor as expected. But this one blaze on a white oak, maybe 14 inches in diameter, faced the opposite direction. I noted it on the form. Anomalous blaze, bearing approximately 245 degrees from the trail's center line. Paint condition consistent with other blazes on corridor. Faded, weathered, likely 5+ years. I didn't think much of it at the time. Paint blazes get put on the wrong side of trees more often than the manual says they should. A volunteer who didn't know the protocol. A crew member working fast in bad light. It happens. By noon, I'd covered about 2.5 miles and was deep into the middle section of Trail 210. This is the part that most hikers, if they ever came here, would remember. The trail drops into a transitional zone where the dry ridge forest gives way to something wetter, denser, and much older. Eastern hemlock, the real thing, not yet killed by the adelgid in this particular drainage, towered above an understory so thick with rhododendron that the light dropped to something like permanent dusk. The air temperature fell noticeably. I estimated 7 or 8 degrees cooler than the ridgeline. The soil under my boots went from dry mineral earth to something soft, dark, and spongy. I stopped to eat lunch sitting on a downed hemlock. While I ate, I reviewed my notes. I'd flagged 11 maintenance items in 2.5 miles, which was a lot. For context, most maintained trails in the district average 2 to 4 items per mile on an annual assessment. Trail 210 was running closer to 5. It wasn't just overgrown, it was neglected in a way that suggested it had been a low priority for a long time. The drainage structures weren't just silted in. Some of them appeared to have been abandoned mid-repair, with tool marks visible in the earth, but no follow-through. After lunch, I continued south. The hemlock corridor lasted about 3/4 of a mile, and within it, I found something else that I noted on my form but didn't fully process until later. There were cut marks on fallen trees across the trail sawcuts, clean and deliberate, the kind you make with a crosscut or bow saw to clear blowdown from a travel corridor. That's standard maintenance, but the cuts were only on one side of each log. Normally, when you clear a blowdown, you make 2 cuts and remove a section wide enough for the trail. These logs had been cut once from above, and the cut section had been left in place. The saw work was precise. Whoever did it knew how to use the tool. But they hadn't finished the job. Every single blowdown in this section I counted 4 had been cut once and left. I photographed them. I didn't have an explanation, and I didn't try to invent one. I just documented what I saw and kept walking. By mid-afternoon, the trail began climbing out of the hemlock drainage onto a drier bench. The vegetation thinned. I could see sky again. And it was here, on this bench, at roughly the 3.25 mile mark, that I found the clearing. I need to describe it carefully, because this is where my condition assessment stopped being routine. The clearing was roughly 30 feet in diameter. It was not natural, or rather, it hadn't started naturally. Someone had cut back the understory in a rough circle, leaving the overstory trees intact. The cuts were old. The stumps had weathered to gray. New growth was reclaiming the edges, but the center remained open, carpeted in a low mat of moss and leaf litter. In the middle of the clearing, someone had built a fire ring out of sandstone slabs, flat pieces, carefully selected and fitted, not just rocks kicked into a circle. The construction was deliberate, almost architectural. None of this was on the district map. There was no campsite designation for this location. No sign of a permit tag, no fire grate, no indication that this site had ever been inventoried or managed by the Forest Service. It wasn't illegal. Necessarily dispersed camping is generally allowed in the Sipsey wilderness, but the level of effort that had gone into creating this site was unusual for a spot this remote, on a trail this empty. I set my pack down at the edge of the clearing and began documenting. GPS coordinates, photos from 4 cardinal directions, measurements of the fire ring, descriptions of the cut stumps. I was doing my job. And as I worked, I noticed the next thing. There were blazes at the edge of the clearing, 3 of them, on 3 different trees, all facing inward toward the center of the clearing, not toward the trail. Same white paint, same dimensions, same degree of weathering. And on the south side of the clearing, a 4th blaze faced outward, away from the clearing and away from the trail. pointing down the slope toward the drainage below. 4 blazes, none of them marking Trail 210. Marking something else. I stood in the center of the clearing and turned slowly. The fire ring was at my feet. The blazes formed a rough arc on the north, east, and west sides, all facing me as if I were the intended audience. The 4th blaze, on the south side, was an invitation. Come this way, go downhill. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because this is where most people expect me to say I was afraid. I wasn't. I was confused. I was a 24-year-old forestry school graduate, 11 days into his first job. And I was looking at evidence that someone had been out here, someone who knew how to use a saw, how to select sandstone, how to paint a proper blaze, and had built something that wasn't in any file at the district office. That's not frightening. That's a management concern. I decided to follow the 4th blaze. The slope below the clearing was steep but manageable. Rhododendron pressed in from both sides, but someone had clipped it back just enough to create a narrow passage. Not a trail, exactly, but a route. A deliberate line of travel through vegetation that would otherwise be impenetrable. After about 200 yards of descent, I came to another blaze on a hemlock facing downhill. 50 yards beyond that, another. I was following a marked route that didn't exist on any map. The drainage below was tight, a narrow V-cut in the sandstone with a small stream at the bottom, maybe 2 feet wide, running clear over orange-brown rock. The route deposited me at the stream edge and then stopped. No more blazes, no more clipped rhododendron. Just the water, the rock, and the closed canopy above. But on the sandstone wall of the drainage, about 4 feet above the waterline, someone had painted something. It was small, maybe 8 inches tall, 10 inches wide. It wasn't a blaze. It was a number. The number 7. White paint. Same type as the blazes. Weathered to the same degree. Painted with the same brush, or at least the same width of brush. Just the number 7, in a simple block style, on the canyon wall, above a stream, at the bottom of an unmarked route. Below a clearing that nobody at the Bankhead Ranger District office had ever mentioned to me. I photographed it. I measured its height above the waterline and its position relative to the nearest blaze. I logged the GPS coordinates. Then I climbed back up to the clearing, gathered my pack, and continued south on Trail 210. I reached the 208 junction at about 5 o'clock. The south terminus of 210 was marked with a standard Forest Service intersection sign. And the contrast was striking. Everything here was official, maintained, normal. I made camp at a flat spot near the junction, ate dinner, and reviewed my notes by headlamp. The condition report was thorough. I documented 31 maintenance items over 4.5 miles. Drainage failures, tread erosion, camber problems, encroaching vegetation, improperly blazed trees. It was, on paper, a complete professional assessment. But the clearing, the extra blazes, the unmarked route, and the painted number were not maintenance items. They didn't fit on the form. I didn't know what box to check. I wrote them up in the narrative comments section at the bottom of the last page, using the same flat language I'd used for everything else. Undocumented cleared site at approximate mile 3.25. Non-standard blaze pattern. Unmarked route descending to drainage. Painted numeral observed on sandstone formation. I slept fine that night. I want to emphasize that. Nothing happened in the dark. Nothing disturbed my camp. No sounds, no footsteps, no shapes at the edge of the firelight. I slept the way I always sleep in the backcountry, deeply, comfortably, until my alarm went off at 5:30. The next morning, I hiked north on 210. Back the way I'd come, doing a second pass to verify my notes from the day before. Everything matched. The clearing was still there. The blazes still faced inward. The half-finished saw cuts on the blowdowns were exactly as I'd left them. I did not descend to the drainage again. I had my photographs, and I had my GPS coordinates. I didn't need to see the number twice. I was back at the Brazil Creek trailhead by early afternoon. I drove to the district office, typed up my condition report, and submitted it to Angie Pruitt. She read it while I stood there. She read all the way to the narrative comments at the bottom. Then she looked up. "You found the clearing," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "And you went downhill." I followed the blazes to the drainage. I documented what I found. She set the report on her desk. She aligned it with the edge. She didn't look uncomfortable, that's not the right word. She looked like someone deciding how much of a conversation to have. "Every seasonal finds the clearing," she said. "Not everybody goes downhill. But you documented it properly, so we'll talk about it." She opened a drawer and pulled out a file folder. It was thin, maybe 5 or 6 pages, and the tab was labeled with a handwritten 210-C. She didn't hand it to me. She opened it herself and turned it so I could see the first page. It was a condition report. Same standard form I'd just filled out. Dated June 2019. The narrative comments section at the bottom had an entry that closely mirrored mine. Undocumented clearing with constructed fire ring, non-standard blazes, unmarked route to drainage, painted numeral on sandstone. Except the numeral recorded in 2019 was not 7. It was 6. Angie turned to the next page. Another condition report dated May 2016. Same description of the clearing and the blazes. The numeral recorded on the sandstone, 5. The next page was from 2013. The numeral, 4. She closed the folder. "Trail 210 has been in the system since the 70s, she said. "It was built on an old logging grade, like most of our trails. CCC didn't touch it, it's too remote, too steep in the middle section. It's never been a popular route. Average visitor count is probably single digits per year, maybe less." "Who's painting the numbers?" I asked. "I don't know. Nobody knows. The clearing was first documented in 2004 by a seasonal named Paulson. He found a constructed fire ring and inward-facing blazes, but no drainage route and no number, just the clearing. He reported it, his supervisor filed it, and nobody followed up. The next seasonal who walked 210 was in 2007. She found the route to the drainage and the number 1. I did the math. 2007, 2010, 2013, 2016, 2019, 2023. Every 3 years. 1 number higher each time. "It's every time we send someone," I said. Angie shook her head. "It's not every time we send someone, it's every time we send a first-season employee. We've had experienced staff on 210 in between. I walked it myself in 2017. Clearing was there. Blazes were there. Route was there. But the number on the wall was the same one the previous report documented 5. It hadn't changed. It changes when a new person goes." I remember the silence in the office after she said that. Not dramatic silence, just the hum of the air conditioner and the muffled sound of a truck on Highway 33. "That's why you send the rookies," I said. "I send the rookies because Trail 210 needs a condition assessment, and it's good training for new employees. The terrain is difficult, the maintenance needs are real, and it teaches you to document carefully. What they find in the drainage is something I've been tracking because it's my job to track what happens on these trails." But I've never made an official report beyond this file because I don't have an explanation. I have 6 data points and I have a pattern. That's all. She closed the folder and put it back in the drawer. Write up your vehicle mileage and submit your per diem, she said. You've got campsite inspections at Borden Creek on Monday. That should have been the end of it. A strange detail on an obscure trail, documented by my supervisor, filed in a drawer, unexplained but contained. I should have moved on to Borden Creek and spent the rest of my first summer learning to be a competent seasonal employee. But something about the math wouldn't leave me alone. Not the 3-year interval that was easy enough to rationalize. The district's maintenance cycle for low-priority trails was roughly every 3 years. And first-season employees were typically the ones assigned to the least desirable routes. Someone who knew the schedule could predict when the next new person would walk 210. What I couldn't rationalize was the half-finished saw cuts. I documented 4 blowdowns in the Hemlock corridor, each cut once from above and left in place. That took effort. Someone had carried a saw into one of the most remote sections of the Sipsey wilderness, cut into 4 downed trees with the skill of someone who'd done trail work, and then deliberately stopped before completing the job. That's not carelessness. That's not a volunteer who got tired. That's someone who wanted to leave evidence of having been there. Evidence that would be visible to anyone walking the trail without actually clearing the obstruction. They were leaving the trail harder to walk on purpose. I thought about that for 3 days before I went to Corey. We were replacing a fire grate at a campsite off Trail 200, working in the shade of a massive sandstone bluff. I'd been waiting for the right moment, and when the work paused, I told him what I'd found. The clearing, the blazes, the drainage, the number. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he sat on the edge of the new grate and drank water for a long time. Mine was 3, he said. What? When I walked 210 my first summer, 2016, the number on the wall was 3. Angie's file says the 2016 report recorded 5. He looked at me. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, exactly, but reassessment. Like I'd changed shape. That's not right, he said. I remember it clearly. It was a 3. I wrote it in my report. I saw the file. The 2016 entry says 5. Corey set his water bottle down very carefully. Then either Angie changed what I wrote, or I'm misremembering. And I promise you, Darren, I'm not misremembering. I spent 20 minutes staring at that number. I can still see it. This was the first time the investigation, and I'm going to call it that, because that's what it became, moved from something I was passively documenting to something I was actively trying to understand. Because if Corey's report originally said 3, and the file now said 5, then either the file had been altered, or the number on the wall had been painted over between Corey's visit and whenever Angie reviewed it. Either way, the pattern I'd been shown a clean, sequential count, 1 through 7, one number every 3 years, was not as clean as it appeared. I didn't confront Angie. I didn't have the standing. I was 11 days into a 6-month seasonal appointment, and she was the person who would determine whether I got invited back for a second season. But I started paying attention to things that a more trusting employee might have ignored. The first thing I noticed was the district's trail maintenance records. These were kept in a shared drive on the office network, a folder structure organized by trail number. Going back to 2002, when the district digitized its paper files. I had legitimate access to these records as part of my job. I opened the folder for Trail 210. There were 6 condition reports in the folder: 2004, 2007, 2010, 2013, 2016, and 2019. This matched Angie's file. But the 2016 report, the one that should have been Corey's, listed the reporting employee as C. Meeks. Corey's last name was Meeks. I opened it and read the narrative comments. The language was nearly identical to what I'd seen in Angie's physical file. Clearing, blazes, route, numeral. The numeral recorded in the digital file was 5. But there was something else. At the very bottom of the form, below the narrative comments, there was a line I hadn't noticed before in the physical copies. It read, "Form reviewed and amended by A. Pruitt, July 14th, 2016. Reviewed and amended." I checked the other reports. Every single one had the same line at the bottom. Every report had been reviewed and amended by A. Pruitt. The dates of amendment were always within a few weeks of the original filing. And the amendment dates went all the way back to 2007, which was her first year as lead recreation technician. Angie had been editing the condition reports for Trail 210 for 16 years. I didn't know what to do with this information. I still don't know fully what to do with it. But I knew I couldn't just ask her. Because the one thing the amended reports told me with certainty was that whatever story the file told the clean sequential count, the neat 3-year interval, it was at least partially her construction. The raw data, the numbers, the seasonals actually found on the wall, might be something different. I needed to talk to the other people who'd walked Trail 210. The second seasonal I tracked down was Marcus Webb. He'd walked 210 in 2019, the report immediately before mine. He was living in Huntsville by the time I reached him, working for the City Parks Department. I called him on a Sunday evening in June, about 3 weeks after my own walkthrough. Marcus remembered Trail 210 clearly. "I found a 6, he said, without hesitation. Painted on the sandstone, right above the waterline. White paint. I took pictures." "Do you still have them?" "Somewhere. On an old phone, probably." "Why?" I told him about the file, about the sequential numbers, about Angie's amendments. He was quiet for a while. "She told me the same thing she probably told you," he said. "That every seasonal finds the clearing, that the numbers go up by 1 each time." She showed me the folder. When I saw it, the previous entry said 5, and mine made 6. It all looked clean. "Did she mention the amendments?" "No. I didn't even think to look for that. I filled out my form, turned it in, and moved on. She didn't make a big deal out of it. She made it feel like a curiosity, like something the district had been tracking but couldn't explain." "Did anything else happen on your walkthrough? Anything you didn't put on the form?" Another pause. Longer this time. "The clearing felt wrong," he said. "I don't mean haunted or scary. I mean geometrically wrong. When I stood in the middle of it and looked at the blaze pattern, the spacing between the marked trees wasn't even. The north blaze was closer to the center than the east and west blazes. It was like whoever placed them was measuring from something that wasn't the center of the clearing, like the center had moved. The center of the clearing moved? The fire ring hadn't moved. But the growth pattern at the edges where the understory was reclaiming the cut area, it wasn't even either. The north side had grown in more than the other sides. If you'd drawn the clearing's boundary when it was first cut, it would have been a circle. By the time I saw it, it was more like an egg, narrower on the north end, as if the clearing was shrinking unevenly. I asked him if he'd photographed that, and he said he hadn't. He'd noticed it but hadn't thought it was significant enough to document. He was a first-season employee doing a condition assessment. Vegetation patterns weren't his assignment. After Marcus, I tried to find the 2013 seasonal. Angie's file listed the reporting employee as T. Davis. I searched the district's personnel records, the portions I had access to, and found a Terrence Davis who'd been a GS3 forestry technician on the Bankhead district in 2013. No current contact information. I tried social media, alumni directories, even the Auburn Forestry Department's Career Services office. Nothing. Terrence Davis, as far as I could tell, had left the Forest Service after one season and disappeared into private life. The 2010 seasonal was harder still. The file listed only initials, RK. No full name on the condition report. The form had a signature block, but the digital copy didn't preserve signatures. I would have needed to find the original paper copy, and that would have meant asking Angie for access to files I had no legitimate professional reason to request. I let it go, for a while. The thing about working a seasonal position in a small district is that your world gets very contained. You work with the same 4 or 5 people every day. You eat lunch in the same break room. You drive the same forest roads. And you develop a sense, over weeks and months, of what's normal inside that small world and what isn't. By July, 2 months into my season, I'd developed that sense. And what wasn't normal was Angie's relationship with Trail 210. She never mentioned it again after our initial conversation, never asked me about my findings, never referenced the file, never brought up the numbers. But I noticed, because I was paying attention now, that she checked the 210 folder on the shared drive at least once a week. The file's metadata showed the last accessed date, and it updated regularly. She wasn't editing anything, as far as I could tell. She was just looking, checking. And in mid-July, something happened that I didn't understand until much later. The district received a volunteer trail maintenance request. This was routine. We got them every season from hiking clubs, scout troops, church groups. A group called the Sipsey Canyon Conservancy had submitted a form requesting permission to perform brushing and drainage work on Trail 209 over a weekend in August. The form was standard. Angie approved it in 2 days. A week later, another request came in. Same group, same form. But this one was for Trail 210. Angie denied it. The denial was immediate. Same day the request came in. The reason she checked on the form was trail not currently scheduled for volunteer maintenance per district priority list. That was technically true. Trail 210 wasn't on the volunteer maintenance schedule, but neither had Trail 209 been on that schedule before the first request was approved. I wouldn't have known about any of this if Corey hadn't told me. He processed the volunteer paperwork as part of his duties, and the inconsistency bothered him. "She's never denied a volunteer request in the 3 years I've been here," he said. "We don't have enough staff to turn down free labor. Every trail in the wilderness could use work. But she won't let anyone else on 210. Anyone else besides the seasonals she sends." Right. Because if a volunteer crew went out there and cleared the blowdowns, cut back the overgrowth, cleaned up the drainage, then the next time she sent a rookie, the trail wouldn't feel the same. It wouldn't be this abandoned, overgrown, creepy corridor that makes you pay attention to every detail. The trail being difficult is part of the experience. That's why the saw cuts are half finished. Somebody's maintaining the trail just enough to keep it passable, but not enough to make it comfortable. I looked at him. "You think Angie's doing the saw cuts?" He shook his head slowly. Angie's 61 years old and has a bad knee. She's not carrying a cross-cut saw into the hemlock corridor. But I think she knows who is. This was the point where I had to make a decision about what kind of problem I was dealing with. If Angie was coordinating with someone to maintain a specific condition on Trail 210, a sunner, keeping it overgrown, keeping it difficult, keeping it isolated in order to produce a particular experience for new employees. That was a management concern, maybe even an ethics concern. But it wasn't dangerous. Nobody was being harmed. The trail was real. The maintenance needs were real. The work I'd done out there was legitimate. But the numbers on the sandstone were something else. Because if Angie was editing the condition reports to create the appearance of a clean sequential count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the actual numbers being found on the wall were different, then the pattern she'd shown me was a fiction. And the real pattern, whatever numbers were actually being painted on that rock, was something she was deliberately concealing. I needed to see the wall again. I couldn't go back to Trail 210 on a work assignment without Angie's authorization, and I couldn't request that authorization without explaining why. So I went on my own time. A Saturday in late July, my day off. I drove out to the Brazil Creek trailhead before dawn, parked my personal truck behind the gate, and hiked south. The trail was different in July than it had been in May. The vegetation had exploded. Sections that were narrow in spring were nearly impassable now, choked with greenbrier and Virginia creeper. The humidity was brutal, 90 degrees by 8 in the morning. Air so thick with moisture that my shirt was soaked through before I reached the 1-mile mark. The hemlock corridor, when I reached it, was the only relief. The temperature drop was even more dramatic in summer. Walking into those trees felt like stepping into a different climate zone. I reached the clearing at mid-morning. It looked exactly as I'd left it 2 months earlier. Fire ring, inward-facing blazes. The opening on the south side where the unmarked route descended to the drainage. Nothing had changed. I went downhill. The route was harder to follow in full summer growth. The clipped rhododendron had sent out new shoots, narrowing the passage. I had to push through in several places, but the blazes were still there. White paint on hemlock bark, leading me down to the stream at the bottom of the drainage. I reached the sandstone wall. I found the spot where I'd photographed the number 7 in May. The number 7 was gone. The sandstone surface where it had been painted was clean. Not scrubbed, I could see that immediately. There were no abrasion marks, no chemical staining, no evidence that anyone had removed the paint mechanically. The surface was simply bare. The paint had either been dissolved by something or had been covered with a material that matched the natural color of the rock so precisely that I couldn't detect it from inches away. But 12 inches to the left of where the 7 had been, there was a new mark. It was not a number. It was a line, a single vertical line, about 6 inches tall, scratched into the sandstone with something harder than the rock itself. Not painted, incised. The scratch was fresh. Light-colored stone dust was still visible in the groove. I photographed it from multiple angles. I measured its dimensions. I looked for other marks on the wall and found none. Just the one line, positioned near where the 7 had been, made with a different method and a different tool. I climbed back to the clearing and sat down on the edge of the fire ring. Here is what I was thinking. If the painted numbers were being placed for the benefit of first-season employees as part of whatever ritual or tradition or experiment Angie was running, then the numbers would only need to exist at the time of the assessment. They could be painted before the seasonal arrived and removed afterward. The wall was a stage. The numbers were props. And whatever audience they were intended for had already seen the show, but the incised line was different. You can't easily remove a scratch from sandstone. It's permanent. Whoever made it knew that. They were switching from a temporary medium to a permanent one. The question was why. I spent 2 more hours in the drainage that morning, searching upstream and downstream from the marked wall. About 40 yards upstream, where the canyon narrowed and the sandstone walls rose to maybe 15 feet on both sides, I found something I'd missed on my first visit. High on the east wall, well above the waterline, maybe 8 feet up, reachable only if you were tall or brought something to stand on, there were more incised marks. Not numbers, not letters. Lines, groups of lines, tally marks. I counted them carefully, standing on a rock in the stream bed and stretching to get my camera close enough for a clear photograph. There were 4 groups. The first group had 4 vertical lines with a diagonal slash through them. A standard 5-count tally. The second group was the same, 5. The third group had 3 vertical lines, no slash. The fourth group was a single vertical line, 5, 5, 3, 1, 14 total. I had no idea what 14 meant. I didn't know if these marks were related to the painted numbers, or if they'd been made by the same person, or if they'd been there for decades. Sandstone incisions don't weather the same way paint does. These could have been 10 years old or 50. The only thing I could say with confidence was that they were deliberate. They were organized, and they were in the same drainage as the painted numbers. I hiked back to the trailhead and drove home. I didn't go to the district office. I didn't tell Angie. I didn't tell Corey. For the first time since I'd started this job, I was holding information that I hadn't shared with anyone. And I understood viscerally, not just intellectually, why Angie might have chosen to keep her own version of this story in a thin file in a drawer rather than escalating it through official channels. Because what would the report say? Someone is painting numbers on a rock in a remote canyon, and someone else or the same someone is scratching tally marks on the wall above them. No property damage beyond minor defacement of a natural surface. No public safety concern. No criminal activity I could name. Just marks on stone, in a place almost no one ever visits, following a pattern I didn't understand. I spent August finishing my seasonal duties. Campsite inspections, trail maintenance, visitor contacts, fire patrol. Normal work. I was good at it. Angie told me in my mid-season review that my documentation was the best she'd seen from a first-year employee, and she'd be recommending me for a return appointment. I didn't go back to Trail 210. But in late August, a week before my season ended, something happened that pulled the thread again. The Sipsey Canyon Conservancy, the volunteer group whose Trail 210 request Angie had denied, held their annual meeting at the community center in Moulton. It was a public event. I drove over on a weeknight, wearing civilian clothes, not identifying myself as Forest Service. I wanted to know who these people were and why they'd specifically requested access to Trail 210. The meeting was small. Maybe 20 people, mostly retirees. They discussed upcoming projects, fundraising, membership, normal nonprofit business. The president was a man named Dale Hutcherson, mid-60s, retired from Alabama Power. After the formal business concluded, I introduced myself. I didn't say I worked for the Forest Service. I said I was a hiker interested in the Sipsey wilderness, which was true. Dale was friendly and eager to talk. The Conservancy had been around since the early 90s, he said. Their focus was trail maintenance and advocacy for the Sipsey wilderness. They'd worked on almost every trail in the system at one point or another. Almost every trail? I said. We haven't been able to get on 210 in years, he said. And something in his voice shifted, not anger exactly, but a familiar frustration. We put in a request every season. Forest Service turns it down every time. Different reasons each time, but the answer's always no. Why do you keep requesting it? He studied me for a moment. You've been on 210. I didn't confirm or deny it. The trail's in bad shape, he said. Worst in the system. It needs real work, not the cosmetic stuff somebody's been doing in there. We've seen the saw cuts, half finished. That's not maintenance. That's somebody playing at maintenance. You've been on the trail recently? I go in from the south end, off 208. Wilderness area, public land. The Forest Service can deny our volunteer maintenance request, but they can't keep me from hiking. I was in there in April, before the growth came in. Walked the whole corridor. Did you see the clearing? He looked at me steadily. Son, I built the clearing. The room had mostly emptied by then. A few people were stacking chairs. Dale gestured toward the door, and we walked outside into the warm evening air. He leaned against his truck in the parking lot and told me a story I hadn't expected. In 1998, Dale Hutcherson was 40 years old and had been hiking the Sipsey Wilderness for 2 decades. He knew every trail in the system, including 210, which at that time was in better condition, maintained on a regular schedule, brushed and cleared annually. He'd been part of a volunteer crew that did drainage work on the trail in the mid-90s. During one of those work trips, he'd discovered the drainage below the bench at the 3.25-mile mark. He'd been looking for a place to relieve himself, walked off the trail, and found the narrow canyon with the sandstone walls and the clear stream. He thought it was beautiful. Over the next several years, he cleared the understory to create a campsite on the bench above the clearing and marked a route to the drainage with white blazes so he could find it again in dense vegetation. I used Forest Service blaze paint, he said. Same stuff the crews use. I had a can from a work trip. I know that wasn't proper, but I wasn't thinking about regulations. I was thinking about having a camp near the prettiest little canyon in the Sipsey. The inward-facing blazes, I said. Those are mine. I put them up so I could find the clearing from any direction. If I came in from the north, south, east, or west, I'd see a blaze pointing me to the center. And the route to the drainage? Mine too. The blazes going downhill, the cleared rhododendron. All me. I spent years on that spot. It was my place. What about the numbers? Dale's expression changed. The openness that had been there a moment ago closed down, not completely but noticeably, like a door swinging half shut. The numbers are not mine, he said, but you've seen them. I saw the first one in 2007, a number 1, painted on the sandstone right above the water line, in the same white blaze paint I'd used, same brush width. Somebody had matched my materials exactly. I didn't know what it meant. I thought maybe it was a survey marker or a geocache reference or some kid messing around. I left it alone. And then? And then I went back the next year and it was gone. Clean rock, like it had never been there. But there was a scratch mark nearby. 1 line. I went back the year after that, nothing new. No paint, no scratches. Then in 2010, a new number, a 2. Same spot, same paint, same brush. He paused. He was working something out in his head, deciding what to say next. I started keeping track, he said. I went in every year, sometimes twice a year. The numbers appear every 3 years. They go up by 1. And between appearances, the paint vanishes and a scratch mark shows up. I've documented this from 2007 through 2023. I have photographs of every number and every scratch. The tally marks upstream, I said. The groups on the high wall. He looked at me sharply. Those are mine. I put those there. That's my count. 5, 5, 3, 1. That's every visit I made to the drainage from 2007 through 2022 where I found a change. 14 visits where something was different from the time before. I stood in that parking lot in Moulton, Alabama. and felt the shape of the problem rearrange itself. Dale had built the clearing. Someone else was using it, using the location, the materials, the blaze paint, the sandstone wall, to conduct a count that appeared only for first-season Forest Service employees every 3 years, and vanished between appearances. And Angie Pruitt, who knew about both Dale's clearing and the mysterious numbers, was editing the condition reports to present a clean, sequential pattern that might or might not reflect what the seasonals actually found on the wall. "Have you ever talked to Angie Pruitt about this?" I asked. "Once, in 2011, after the second number appeared. I called the district office and asked to speak to whoever managed Trail 210. She took the call. I told her what I'd found. She listened, thanked me, and said the district would look into it. Then nothing. I never heard back. And the next time I applied for a volunteer maintenance permit on 210, it was denied for the first time. She locked you out. She locked everybody out. Before 2011, we'd done maintenance on 210 3 or 4 times. After 2011, never again. And the trail's been getting worse every year since. Not because nobody's working on it. Somebody's still going in there with a saw, doing those half-cuts. But because the real work isn't being done. The drainage structures are failing. The tread is eroding. In another 10 years, that trail won't exist." He looked at me. "You work for the Forest Service, don't you?" I admitted it. He nodded like he'd known from the moment I introduced myself. "Then let me tell you what I think is happening, and you can decide what to do with it." Dale believed that someone, not Angie, but someone with access to Forest Service materials and knowledge of the maintenance schedule, had co-opted his clearing as a site for something he couldn't explain. The numbers, the precision of the paint matching, the 3-year cycle synchronized to the rookie assignments, the vanishing between visits, all of it suggested a person who was deeply embedded in the district's operations. Someone who knew when new employees would be sent to 210, who had access to the same blaze paint, and who could enter and exit the wilderness without being noticed. "I've been going in there for 25 years, he said. "I know every access point, every old logging road, every drainage that connects to the Sipsey Fork. Whoever's doing this knows them too. They're not coming in from the trailheads. They're not using maintained trails. They're coming in from somewhere else." He gave me a thumb drive before I left. On it were 147 photographs spanning 2007 to 2022, organized by date. Every number, every scratch, every change on the sandstone wall. A visual record that was more complete than anything in Angie's file. My season ended a week later. Angie signed my paperwork, told me I'd done good work, and said she'd see me next May. I drove back to Auburn with a thumb drive in my glove compartment. I spent the fall going through Dale's photographs on my laptop. They were detailed, well-composed, time-stamped. The man had been a meticulous observer, and his record told a different story than Angie's file. The numbers Dale documented were 1, 2, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. Not a clean sequence. The second appearance, in 2010, was a 2 matching the expected progression. But the third appearance, in 2013, was also a 2. The count had repeated. Then it jumped to 4 in 2016, skipping 3 entirely. After that, it proceeded normally. 5, 6, 7. If Dale's photographs were accurate, and I had no reason to doubt them, then whoever was painting the numbers had made an error in 2013. Or changed their mind. Or been interrupted. The sequence was almost regular, but not quite. And Angie had smoothed it out in her file, correcting the 2013 entry from 2 to 4 and adjusting the preceding entries to create a clean 1 through 7 count. Corey's memory came back to me. He'd said his number was 3, but the file said 5. Dale's photographs showed 2016 as a 5. So either Corey was wrong, or his number had been painted over between his visit and Dale's next trip to the drainage, replaced with the correct number in the sequence that Angie was constructing. I was looking at 2 competing records. One was institutional Angie's file, curated and amended, telling a story of orderly progression. The other was independent Dale's photographs, telling a story of something messier, less predictable, and more human. I went back for my second season in May 2024. Angie was still there. Corey was not. He'd taken a permanent position with Alabama State Parks over the winter. The seasonal crew was 3 people now. Budget cuts again. I didn't ask about Trail 210. I didn't need to. A new seasonal named Jess Thornton had started 2 weeks before me. She was 22, fresh out of a natural resources program at Mississippi State. On her 9th day, Angie told her to pack for a 2-day condition assessment. Trail 210. I watched Jess leave the office that morning with the same kit I'd carried the year before: forms, flagging tape, GPS, hand tools. She looked confident and unbothered. Why wouldn't she? It was a routine assignment. She came back 2 days later. I was in the office when she turned in her condition report. Angie read it. I watched Angie's face. There was a moment, brief, controlled, when something moved behind her expression. Not surprise, recognition. After Jess left the room, I found an excuse to walk past Angie's desk. The condition report was sitting on top of her inbox. I couldn't read the whole thing, but I could see the narrative comments section at the bottom of the last page. The numeral Jess had recorded on the sandstone was 8. The count was still going, clean and sequential, as far as the file would show. Whatever Jess had actually found on the wall, Angie would make it fit. I finished my second season without incident. I performed my duties. I documented trails, inspected campsites, contacted visitors. I did not return to Trail 210. I did not discuss the numbers with Jess. I did not confront Angie. But on my last day, as I was cleaning out my desk, I found something in the back of the bottom drawer. A piece of sandstone, maybe 3 inches by 2 inches, flat and smooth. It had been cut, not broken, cut with clean edges. And on its face, in white paint, was the number 9. There was no note, no explanation, just the stone in my drawer, waiting. The next number in the sequence, placed where I'd find it at the end of my second season, not on the canyon wall where the others had been. In the district office, in my desk. I don't know who put it there. I don't know if it was Angie or Dale or someone I never met who moves through the Sipsey wilderness on routes that don't appear on any map. I don't know if the number 9 means I'm the next entry in someone's count, or if it's an invitation, or if it's a warning. I took the stone with me. I still have it. It sits on a shelf in my apartment in Auburn, next to the thumb drive Dale gave me in the parking lot in Moulton. 2 pieces of evidence from 2 separate records of the same unexplained phenomenon. I was offered a 3rd season on the Bankhead District. I accepted. I start in 3 weeks. And I know, with the certainty of someone who has walked this trail before, that there will be a new seasonal employee in the office. And within 2 weeks, Angie will tell them to pack a bag for Trail 210. What, I don't know. What I've spent 2 years trying to understand and still can't answer is this. The numbers on the wall count upward. 1 by 1, every 3 years, marked in paint that vanishes between appearances. But the stone in my drawer is ahead of the count. It's the number that hasn't been painted yet. Whoever left it for me knows what the next number will be before it appears on the wall. They're not recording something that's happening. They're telling it where to go. I've walked Trail 210 3 times now. Once for the Forest Service, once on my own, and once in my head every night when I try to sleep. The trail is real. The clearing is real. The sandstone wall with its appearing and disappearing numbers is real. Everything I've described can be verified by the photographs on Dale Hutcherson's thumb drive, by Angie Pruitt's amended files, and by the condition reports of at least 6 seasonal employees over 16 years. But the stone in my drawer is something none of those records can explain. It's not part of the count on the wall. It's not part of Angie's file. It's not in Dale's photographs. It exists outside every system of documentation I've described. And it carries a number that, as of right now, doesn't correspond to anything that's happened yet. This fall, when the growth dies back and the hemlock corridor opens up, I'm going to walk Trail 210 again. Not on assignment, not on my day off. I'm going to request it. I'm going to ask Angie to send me, and I'm going to watch her face when she decides whether a second-season employee has the same right to that trail as a rookie. And when I get to the drainage, I'm going to look at the wall. If the number 9 is there, then the stone in my drawer was a prediction. And somebody in this story knows more than they've told me. If it's not, if the wall shows 8 again, or something else entirely, or nothing at all, then the stone is something worse than a prediction. It's a piece of a wall that hasn't been painted yet. And I have to decide whether carrying it with me means I'm still investigating this story, or whether I've become part of it.